Thank you all for being here. I get so excited about all these things. I have to tell you, my little body is just buzzing because I just love what's going on in terms of the synod. And I think we've talked about this before, but synodality is the most radical change we have seen in the church since the Second Vatican Council. And as a matter of fact, it's an outgrowth of the council. So we're trying to spread the good word and spread the ministry and spread the governance. So if you recall, this path towards synodality officially began in October 2021 with the diocesan phase, the Episcopal National Synthesis, then this continental phase where this group went to a place in Italy and put together the continental phase document, then sent it back to the continents of bishops who got a chance to talk about it some more and then did this final document. So this has really been, I think, one of the strongest processes of consultation that I've seen since I've been at FutureChurch, and probably most other people feel the same way. And through all these phases, FutureChurch has shared your input, your struggles, your joys, and your hopes for the church all along the way. So the final document for the North American Continental Stage was released on April 12th, so not that long ago. And it went through a discernment process by 931 delegates. So you'll see here, there's a little breakdown of who gathered. So each bishop selected 4 or 5 delegates. And there were, in the North American continent, there were 12 meetings, all of them by Zoom. We were the only continent out of 7 who didn't meet in person. Everybody else managed to meet in person, but we met over Zoom. So there's probably some disadvantages to that, of course, as well as maybe some advantages, because maybe some people got to go that wouldn't have gotten to go. But we saw that about half and half men, women. We see a lot of lay women, laymen. There were deacons, priests, women religious, male religious, and then bishops. So 90% of the diocese were represented. And so each delegate was asked to register for one of 12 virtual assemblies. And that was followed by small group listening circles. And before they actually met, they all had some time to introduce each other, who was going to be in their virtual meeting. And then there was large group sharing afterwards. And of those present during this discernment stage, notably one of the most respected participants, Bishop John Stowe of Lexington, expressed his frustration at a talk with those at the gathering, saying the people who gathered did not necessarily strike a tone that matched what had been captured by the diocesan, national, and continental phase. He was kind of disappointed with the conversations that he heard. And he said, you know, a lot of people were not happy with what was going on. They expressed some disappointment, and they were questioning, you know, the direction of the synod. And I think he heard a lot of this, which is what caused him concern. They had questions about whether the synod was trying to rewrite doctrine, change it, and they were opposed to that. And there were calls for greater precision about what inclusivity meant. In other words, we want to be inclusive, but maybe not that inclusive. Some of the people are worried about who are going to be included. And if you saw John Allen's latest article, he questioned whether inviting laity to the synod in this way would be, quote unquote, stacking the deck. And he meant that, he was very specific, and what he reflected was that that would water down the voices of conservative bishops, which I say, yay, that's what synodality is about. And there was this very low turnout of priests during this whole phase, and that was a worry. And then the bishops got together and talked among themselves. And honestly, according to John, they were kind of grumpy about the whole thing. There was a lot of, some positive things, of course, they're, there for Pope Francis, and some, at least they want to appear to be, but they're not too happy about the synodal process. And he says, of course, this shows up in what they're funding, hardly anything, any emphasis on synodality, and a whole lot of emphasis about the Eucharistic revival, which we all know is not about synodality in any real sense of the way. Or you could actually see a Eucharistic revival as synodality if they were actually engaging in the synodal process. But of course, they're not. Yet, I think the final document really does capture much of what went before that. And I think in a surprising fashion, given what John said, but we'll look at what the bishops say later, and you can actually pick up on what he said. I'm so glad that he spoke out, because he sort of brings all the bishops to task. He says, and does it publicly, so that he lets them know. And I don't think he does this in some way viciously or anything, but I think it's a good thing that he's sort of naming these things so that we can all be aware of what we were afraid would happen, was the bishops not necessarily joining in the way they should. So who wrote this final document? So here are the people on the US part of the North American Synod team. So here they are listed. And then here they are, all their faces with some contact information. And there's John Stowe in the middle of the bottom. And there's a lot of good people on this team. So I think the fact that we're getting good documents is a tribute to those people who really are committed to making sure the voices of those who have been excluded and hurt and who have suffered in this church have come forward. And here's their contact information. So this, I'll give you a link to this in another page, but I went through and I'll tell you why. I think there's good reason to contact them now, but we'll get to that later. And then this is the Canadian side of the North American team. So you can see here, this Bishop Raymond Poisson is the president of the conference, and then all these other folks were also a part of this writing team. So they're the folks that got back together after listening to all this discernment, hearing what 931 delegates had to say. They put the document together. So the document has has 5 sections, basically. There's an introduction. There's this section called 3 Key Themes. There are the bishop's reflections, and this is where you can hear a little bit of the grumping, and then the priorities for October and the conclusion. And it does contain a lot of the things that you told us you cared about, and that a lot of other people from Catholics from all over the world told us they cared about. So the introduction talked mostly about the process and, a bit about, how they held each other in that time. And I like this part. They wrote that there were many times when they were together and they were kind of uncertain about where to go. There was tension, and it said the Synod team chose to trust the Holy Spirit and each other. I hope that's true. I think it probably is. I'm going to grant that they are trying to be sincere here. So then this next section is on the 3 key themes. So there's, and you'll see this in one way or another all throughout. And my guess is the 3 sections in October will be something like this. So called and gifted through baptism, communion with Christ and one another, and sent forth in mission. And so the first key theme is called and gifted through baptism. So the dignity of baptism is the end all be all of our common faith life. So, and this is really the rock on which synodality stands. There's no inequality. And they even talk about this. The document cites and expands Galatians 3:28. It says there's no inequality based on race, nationality, social condition, sex. So it's taking Galatians and bringing it into our time and saying this is what baptism means for us as Christians and Catholics. And then the next part that they talk about within this section is co-responsibility. And they say that, and again, this is something we've heard before, and we hope that it is becoming more and more a part of the reality of the synodal movement. Laity and ordained are co-responsible. We have equal dignity in baptism. And so we need to ground ourselves in that equal dignity. This is the entry point for co-responsibility. And this is the real space where we can allow women and some more marginalized, and this is actually a quote in the document, some more marginalized folks in the church to really take up leadership roles. So not worded so eloquently, but the thought is there, the feeling is there. And then they had this nice section on women. And I think this is surprisingly good, not surprising, but surprisingly good. And as we had Phyllis talking a couple nights ago, Phyllis Zagano, and as she says, as she looks across all these documents from all over the world, there is overwhelming majority of dioceses and continents calling for greater roles for women in the church. So the role of women, the dignity of women, what women should do and be in the church is uppermost at this throughout these synod documents, and it will be I believe, in those documents when we get ready for the October meeting. So it's the document says there can be no true co-responsibility without honoring the dignity of women. Now that can be, a complementarity thing where, okay, but then women do this and men do that, and there's going to be that, but still it's in there. And then women are a marginalized group. The document admits that. So we must examine the decision-making roles, governance, leadership, ordination. Ordination is in this document. So we're still talking about women's ordination. That's a very good thing. So we see it coming forward. It says, we've come a long way. This is a quote, but we deplore the fact that women cannot invest themselves fully. That's a very good quote. And more space needs to be opened, especially at the decision-making tables. So there's a lot of room for calling for women in governance and management. And some people say, okay, that's not enough, and it's not. But once you see people in those women in those places, you're going to see other areas opening up. So it's all, I think, a very good thing. And then they talk about youth in this called and gifted through baptism. The youth are missing in action, and so we need them. And so they're saying what everybody says in the church. We're concerned that young people are not at the table, and we wonder how they are going to be represented in Rome. So a lot of concern about that, as we know. Then there's formation, the final point. And they're talking about this formation and synodality. And they talk about this throughout the document in different ways. So people that are baptized need to understand what we even want in this new radical new church. What is synodality? There's going to have to be intentional, ongoing education and formation. We're going to have to learn how to listen deeply to each other so that we are not just, yes, Father, we'll do that, Father, but that we actually take up our roles as co-responsible people in the church. And then there's this idea, and I think of this rack, stretching, widening the tent. That's going to be hard for people, for a lot of people. So we have to learn how to do that, how to listen, and how to really hold people who are very different from us in the same church. And that this is a lifelong formation. This isn't going to this isn't going to all take place before October or next October or 5 years from now. It is really a long-term. We need long-term plans and curriculums and formation programs for this to happen. Then the second key theme is communion with Christ and one another. So this involves a section on trust and credibility, greater inclusivity, listening, and formation again. And they admit in this document, trust and credibility are broken down because of the clergy sex abuse. The loss of trust cannot be overstated. And there's been not only abuse of children in parish settings and all kinds of settings, but also all kinds of abuse at residential boarding schools for Indigenous people. And this is really the beauty of having the Canadian and the US bishops and the Catholics together, because we know that they are the first to talk about this. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened in the US, but they're the first to really make this issue come forward. And Pope Francis has done a lot of work there, and there's a lot more healing to be done, but they're saying, we know this has happened. And so we need to build trust and healing. And then they say we need a cultural change in the church. And we all know this. The church has not been transparent. It has not been accountable. It has not been co-responsible. There's been clericalism, broad, wide, high, deep. We've had clericalism as the model for the way our church operates, or the culture that our church operates in, and lay people and priests all participate in this. This is the, I will do anything the priest says, the priest, and so we have also participated in that. We have to all together change this. And someone says this, and synodality is the antidote to this clericalism. It's a beautiful way to build trust through dialogue. So if we can speak honestly and speak to each other in love, we can actually break through. And then greater inclusivity for the people in the groups who have felt unwelcome, unheard, and they name them. So it's women, young people, immigrants, racial or linguistic minorities, LGBTQ plus persons, divorced and remarried Catholics, disabled Catholics. And they admit there's been profound suffering. All of us here know that. There's been profound suffering of people who have been somehow made to feel unwelcome, less than whole, less than holy. And so we know that those things are true. And interesting, they also said that there's been suffering because of the limitations placed on the preconciliar Latin rite, that the liturgy is divisive. And we know that as well by a very small but vocal group. Nonetheless, and this is one of the things that kind of irked John Stowe. He's like, we're talking about the Latin liturgy, he's ready to move into Vatican II era. And a lot of us are too. But, but that was in the document. So they did pay attention to that. And they say that listening, it is name the tension between listening and the formation in church teaching. I mean, this is a big, big obstacle to overcome, isn't it? We know that, you can't just say that LGBTQI people are, made in God's image, but what they do is somehow a sin. We know that. We know church teaching has to change, but they're naming it out loud. And the way Pope Francis has addressed this is through sort of a pastoral mode. And I think it is a very good way to go. Instead of just laying down another rule, we're opening this up, we're changing this, we're doing that. He's saying we have to really listen to each other, understand each other, and yes, live with that tension, because there are these teachings that don't really go along with welcoming everybody. And then formation again. The idea is to have training and formation that we will create a safe place where people can ask their real questions about the church teaching without judgment or punishment. And that's if there's one thing that Francis has done for us we have left those days behind largely where we saw John Paul II or especially Benedict, punishing theologians, punishing people who spoke out. And so, this is a new day and age, and it is refreshing, and it is, it'll be complex. We'll have tough conversations, but I think we're all up for it. The third key theme is sent forth on mission. So that involves, as they have these sections named, moving out of the tent, moving out of our comfort zone, being a church in the world, engaged in the world, and formation for mission and Catholic social teaching. And this sounds exactly like the kind of stuff that came out of Vatican II. So moving out of the tent, synodality means we have a mission in the world, and we need to get out of our comfort zone, go where people are, as Francis says. Don't wait for them to come to your parish, get out onto the streets, and caring for all the most downtrodden and wounded, reaching out in times of disaster, showing compassion and care, walking along those who are forced to live at the margins, going out to the peripheries. We must be united in order to proclaim Christ effectively and clearly. And in this bit, I see a little bit of the probably the more conservative parts of the group saying, yeah, we can do all that, but then we have to be united. And for them, united means united under whatever the bishop says. And so, you can see some of the nuance in this language as you go through. So it's there. And for those marginalized, one person or one group said, These people have not left the church, but the church has left them. Amen. Then a church in the world. So we know that there are these tensions. And I think this is where maybe those who tend to be more conservative, although I think we all think about these things. You know, they talked about consumerism, the economic and political upheaval. And it said there are these tensions that they feel between letting the engaging popular culture and letting it enter into the life of the parish, and then seeing it as a threat. There is this tsunami of culture threatening to overwhelm us. So people, who see a sort of us and them mentality, we are the holy church, they are the secular people. We have to engage them, but if you have so much distrust of what's going on, that becomes its own kind of tension, its own kind of threat. And they recognize we don't live in this Christian world anymore. So we need to partner with other people of faith. So that's a pretty makes sense thing to do. Although, I think again, that we don't live in Christendom anymore says something of a truth, but it's not nearly as bad as those who are afraid would make it. And so formation again, and I like this part because it talks about formation for mission and Catholic social teaching. So we need formation in the social mission of the church at all levels. That means clergy. We know clergy need to learn it, and also laity, and that there is a duty to know Catholic social teaching. And that's going to require intentional formation. I don't know about most of you, but at my age, 68, I didn't get a lot of Catholic social teaching until I got into my theology programs, my lay pastoral ministry formation program. That's where I really got to understand Catholic social teaching, because we had to learn it. And I think we don't do enough of that in our parishes. And so people just don't know what the Catholic Church teaches on the social justice level. And as I always say, I'm still a Catholic because of Catholic social justice teaching. It's the heart and soul of the church for me. And then we have this section where the bishops are reflecting on their, what happened during this whole experience. So they had this call afterwards, and John talks about this in the article that was posted. And but 146 participated in at least one of the 12 sessions. They made a little note in the document that even then, some bishops didn't stay the whole time, which is very interesting. And most didn't participate in groups with other Catholics, other lay people, and so forth. They were in groups with other bishops. So, wow, that was amazing to hear. And so they met all together at the end to talk about this experience and what their role is as bishops. What's their charism as bishops? In other words, how do we control this? No, I'm just kidding. I didn't mean that. So some of the comments they made, the bishop, and on both sides, it said, some people said the bishops should have randomly been placed in small groups to mix it up. I agree. Some of the bishops said, though, it was rare to get to listen and talk to other bishops. So they really liked that time together. And they really liked it. And I get this. They got to talk to bishops from Canada. And I think the bishops from Canada do have a very different perspective than the US bishops. And so to some degree, they learned a lot from each other in that way. They said synodality is a great grace. It's challenging, a learning experience, but it's not an easy way. And there was a lot of ambiguity expressed. Where is this all going? There's quite a bit of worry about that. And they said, again, right now, the local church is not structured for synodality. So they said, have we created a church where it's difficult to speak to it? And yes, we have. We have created that structure. And so all that's going to have to be dismantled and reconstructed. And it'll happen all together. It will be a messy process. But they also recognize they need to care beyond their own diocesan walls, which is a good thing, what's happening in the world. And this relative absence of priest in this synodal process really needs to be addressed according to the bishops. And I agree with that. And then they talked about this danger of unrealistic or false expectations. I think everybody should be worried about that. The question is the danger that they see the one that they'll help make happen, which is to kind of do what they can to control the outcomes. So that's interesting. But as they said to each other, don't give up, don't give up on this. And I thought the hopeful thing they said is we are recalibrating. I sure hope so. We must do a better job of consulting those who are poor, migrant communities, indigenous peoples, racial minorities, and the many others who are wounded in church and society. And they said, we bishops need to do a better job of modeling synodality by listening, conversing, and discerning together. Well, I think that's great. I wish they would have done that by just insisting that they were all mixed up in the small groups, even here. So that would have been a great way to model it. So I don't know, maybe this is an afterthought, but it's they could have done it even then. And so they came out, the next section is about the priorities for Rome. So here are the 5 things that they want to make sure get sent up to Rome as priorities, although the whole document is going. So we'll see all these other pieces as well. So we want to see formation in synodality. So we want to overcome the fear, their fear, our fear of talking together. How to be welcoming. How do you address that? How do you actually do that when they are the keepers of doctrine, when they are the ones who are saying, or the church is saying, here is doctrine, here's what the churches teach. And so how do we have radical inclusion in light of that doctrines, in light of those teachings? And then co-responsibility. How does baptism shape our roles? How does it shape the roles for women and laity? How does shared decision-making work? We need to talk about that. And then addressing unity in the midst of this polarization. I think it's a good thing to think about that, for us to begin to try to listen to each other and to hold each other where we really are in the church. I don't think we're going to get rid of polarization completely. There are values behind these different perspectives. So those are going to be hard to bring together, but nonetheless, it's something that they want to be aware of for sure. And they want a church that goes out on the peripheries, not only just on the peripheries inside the church, which would be women, LGBTQI people, divorced and remarried people, all the list, but also in the world. How do we go out to them? So in conclusion, they said the moment can be likened to Pentecost, where there was confusion, fear, and hope for a new day. And the other thing they said is, basically, there is no going back at this time. So they met, a document was created, this final document, which I've just sort of given you the highlights of. And then all these final documents from all over the world came together, and you can read all of them at this address on the Synod website. And so the 7 continents documents, all the documents came together. So our April 12th release sort of coincided with the release of the other 7 documents. And then they got together almost immediately, this group of people, and started looking at these documents and trying to discern what came to the top. And so you can see here reps, they said reps from 5 continents. I'm not sure why all 7 weren't represented here, but these folks went, and we can see in this, we've got Cardinal Grech and Hollerich, and Daniel Flores is, I don't know if you can, my little thing, I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, he's like the second person on the left. We see that on the other side, Sister Natalie is there. And so they came together and they talked for a little over a week, something like that, and discerned like what's most important here. And they said, we're going to do this behind closed doors, and then we're going to have a press conference on the 20th. And so the April 20th press conference offered some of the highlights of the meeting, the things they came to. And so it really came down, And I think Timothy Costello, who is the president of the Australian Bishops' Conference, and he was also the person, one of the people who helped write the original Continental Phase document. So he's one of the people that were at the table for that. He said we focused on two things. We reflected on the experience of the Continental Stage, this enlarger space, enlarge the space of your tent. And then we did a careful reading of the 7 documents and looked at what emerged from each Continental Assembly. And then they discussed the priorities, the points of tension. And this group also met with prefects and general secretaries of the dicasteries to begin a dialogue with them about what they heard and what the heads of these dicasteries had to say as well. And the takeaways were each Continental Assembly was quite unique, but the question of women's roles, authority, and participation rose to the top in about 112 of the 114 national reports. And that carried over into the Continental Phase. And there is more than one way to be church. And the Australian Cardinal said this. And I think we're going to see a lot of this. We saw this talked about a lot in the Amazon Synod. We need to have the principle of subsidiarity, the local church deciding for the church what they need. So if in the Amazon, they need married ordained men, they need women deacons, Francis has said, come to me, ask for it. And so I think that was stressed here. We're not going to see the same for every. We may even see a different rite for the Amazon, or other countries. So we'll see these differences along the way in the midst of unity. So who's working? So this document will then be feed into the Instrumentum Laboris, and that's just a funny word for the working document. This document sets the agenda for the October meeting, and it's being written right now as we speak. And so who's going to write it? Well, we don't know everybody who's going to write it, but we know that some of these folks are going to be there. This is Cardinal Hollerich, that's Cardinal Gretsch, and then we see Sister Natalie there. And so we're going to, and also Monsignor Marin D. San Martin will be there as well. And probably Terry Bonaventura will be in this group. So they're helping write this document for the working group. That document will be released to the bishops. The bishops will get to reflect on it. We've heard talk of June, July. It's not clear exactly when it will be out. And then it's also going to be released to the public. And that document usually comes out in 3 sections, and it'll probably look something like what we've been talking about the whole time: communion, participation, and mission, although the titles could be different. So for each of the 3 weeks, there's a different section of the document that they talk about. They get together in little groups, language groups. They talk about it. They say, oh, we ought to change line 3 to this, and they send it all up, and then they vote on it. But I want to end this with what I think is just the very best news about this whole synod process. On April 26th, Pope Francis announced that women are going to get to vote and non-bishops are going to get to vote. And leaving aside this auditor status, this what women and other people did before, non-ordained people did before, was they got to be there to try to influence the document, but they didn't get a deliberative vote at the end. And now there'll be 70 non-bishop voters beyond the listeners. And if you recall, FutureChurch worked alongside Women's Ordination Conference and a lot of other reform groups to raise awareness about the need for women religious to vote at the Synod. So in 2018 already, we had petition campaigns. We had witnesses. You probably saw the picture of Kate McElwee getting manhandled during one of our witnesses by the police there. And we created a media presence that really created a new level of awareness with the bishops. And I was there as part of, and I'll be again there this year with my media credentials. And one of the advantages of that is you get to be in the hall and you get a chance to ask a question if they call on you, and you have to wait till they call on you. But during that year, I asked, every chance I got, I asked a question that related to women voting, saying, did you know that there are 2 non-ordained men voting? We believe, and what do you think about women religious voting who are also non-ordained? And so as Pope Francis has little by little opened this door to non-ordained voting members, we celebrate now. And I would say that this is one of the biggest joys and changes and has enormous potential for the future decision-making in the church, because with women involved, it will make all the difference in the world. So who's going to vote? Before, 10 religious superiors, all men, voted. Now, it began that a non-ordained religious superior got to vote at one, and we noticed it. And then 70 non-bishop members. Oh, okay. And so now 5 women religious superiors will get to vote. So we have 5 women religious and Sister Natalie. So that's 6. And then there'll be 70 non-bishop members. So how are we going to get those? Pope Francis asked each continent to offer 20 candidates. And he wants those 20 candidates to be 50 men, 50% women, and 50% men. So of that 140 that get offered, 70 will be chosen. It's not clear how they'll be chosen. And can we assume that at least 50% in the end of that 70 will be women? I think we can really look to that happening. So say we've got 35 at least women, and I think the percentage could go higher depending on who's at the table. Sister Natalie will be at the table, and if she's there, I think we'll have even a higher percentage of women, but we will see women there. So at least 41 will be women voting members if we go with the assumption of at least half of those non-voting members will be women. So we've got our hopes up. We're doing our counting. So we're listening for the drum roll. So what you can do to help is Catholic Organizations for Renewal. A bunch of our members got together and we wrote personal letters to everybody on the Synod team saying, as you're considering who should be a part of this, if you're making recommendations, we're asking you to make sure that there's a diversity of people, appointed or suggested to this membership. This is going to be crucial. And so not just people who know about the suffering, but people who are actually suffering, people who have been outside of these decision-making circles for a long time. And so I've got a link here, because in this link is a list of all the contacts that I showed you in an earlier slide. And we'll give this to you too, along with the video, so that you can go to that page. And don't wait to do this very long. If you're going to do it, if you're going to call somebody, do it. If you're going to write an email, do it, because it's possible they're already decided. But if in case not, I think these are one of the things that we want to do to make sure that everybody, we have done all we can to make sure that there's diversity in representation, and especially among those who have not been welcomed in the church for a very long time. And in the lead up to the October, I just want to tell you a little bit about what FutureChurch is focusing on. I'll be there reporting from Rome, and Russ will be here doing all the other work for FutureChurch. Help. We'll be coordinating all the reporting. We'll be doing some witnesses. We'll be part of meetings. I will be meeting with whoever I can who is invited to do some interviews. The other thing we're going to be doing, and as I said before, the one interesting thing, because it's going to be a really interesting synod, we're going to see things happening that we've never seen before. So, if women are saying something in particular, we'll get to ask questions about that and bring it up. So, and then we're going to, inside of the Synod Hall, people send various books. They have to be approved. And so one of the things we hope to accomplish, and we're working very hard on that right now, is to get our copy of Catholic Women Preach into the Synod Hall so that bishops get used to and see this wonderful wisdom of Catholic women who are preaching right now in this platform, online platform. And because part of what we hope will be discussed is in the roles of women, women preaching and women in the lectionary. And that's part of the last thing that we're going to be doing. We're going to be beefing up a campaign that was started by Sister Chris Shank a long time ago at the Synod on the Word, talking about how women have been left out of our lectionary, how we don't hear the stories of our women, the women in our history, the women who have led. And so we're doing a whole new section in Catholic Women Preach on this. And we're also going to be talking to the bishops, to the cardinals. I'll be going to the dicasteries to talk about this so that we hope that we can maybe prod them to offer a supplemental lectionary until they fix the actual lectionary. So that's it right now. And thank you so much for being with us. And Russ, just before you send everybody off to small groups, Chris, you have any highlights that you, in just a few minutes, can you say a few things that you have found interesting, exciting, funny?
Deb, that's just fantastic. The most comprehensive presentation. I'm going to be emailing the link to a bunch of people. Just two things. Well, couple. I did a big review myself of the international documents, just being a little OCD. And I found a lot of common themes compared to the US documents. Certainly women, which you mentioned, but also co-responsibility, LGBTQ youth, a lot of interest in the formation of the synodal process and the tension between tradition and teaching. So a lot of those were reiterated. One interesting factoid that I found along the way is that particularly the Middle East reports had great difficulty with the tent imagery because of so many refugees. So that was sort of a real moment for me to, plug in with the Universal Church. Just one other thing that I would mention that I came across along the way, that Francis is reserving to himself the right to appoint people. So there could be more than 41 women. We don't know yet. So this is all wonderful. Like, I just couldn't be more excited and prouder of FutureChurch for our lay participation, that it's bearing fruit. I mean, it won't be everything we hope for, but it's certainly so much more than when we had to sneak around in 2008 and talk to the women behind the scenes about getting women in the lectionary. So anyway, thank you so much for everything you're doing.